Thursday evening, 7 p.m. in Switzerland and Europe. It's Space Café Young Global Talent Web Talk time. Our Space Café Web Talk with Michelle Hanlon and the Law Student Association ELSA will begin in a couple of seconds, or actually starts now. Thank you for joining us today, everybody, for the first Young Global Talent Space Café of SpaceWatch.Global. I'm Markus, your host today and editor-in-chief of SpaceWatch.Global. We are a Switzerland-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. Some of you might be familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and also the Space Café podcasts. We also keep our fan shop online open for you to support us actively and become a space watcher, if you are not already right now in your heart, at least, and right here. If you miss any of our previous web talks and you want to see them, we have an archive available on our webpage in the event section and also on YouTube. We host our various Space Café web talks live weekly. We are now very honored to welcome you, Michelle Hanlon, today for our first Young Global Talent Space Café. Michelle is one of the most renowned space lawyers based in the US, and we are very excited to have you here on board today, Michelle, and to discuss with European law students, or I think it's clearly going beyond Europe, which is a good sign, about space law, or what it's for, what it does, and what it means. Michelle is co-director of the Center for Air and Space Law at the University of Mississippi in the US, and one of the leading space lawyers, as I said, in the world. She's executive vice president at the National Space Society in the United States and partner of the ABH Space Law firm. Michelle is also co-founder of For All Moonkind. That's what you see behind her back as on the poster. And this is a unique and very fascinating historic register of humankind's heritage on the moon. And if you're interested in that, you should take a look at it. Welcome again, Michelle. SpaceWatch Young Talent is launched today in cooperation with the European Law Student Association, ELSA, and its section in Frankfurt am Main in Germany. ELSA is one of the leading law students associations internationally. And I'm therefore here also with Frederik Wissner from ELSA Frankfurt, who will co-moderate our session and certainly have a lot of good questions to channel to you, Michelle, and find the answers. Let me start. Space is cool, and that's why we are here. And I think everybody agrees to that. We launch rockets, we launch satellites into space since decades. And now we discover again, we have to say, because humankind was already there, the excitement of missions to go to the moon, and now even to go to Mars and beyond. We develop totally new and disruptive technologies to explore space, to design villages on the moon, and to drive robots and helicopters on Mars, which I think will take place next week, first time that humankind is flying above another planet. We're looking forward to that. This is what NASA is planning. It's a huge challenge for humankind, a vision and a planetary outreach. It's a motor of new technologies and it's a motor of startups and innovation. And that is to say, it's also potentially a big business. The question we want to discuss today here are, is that all allowed? What law is framing and securing and enabling actually all these activities? Do we have a space law already in place? Do we need it? Who writes it? Who sets the law rules? Who governs space? What are space lawyers doing? And what are the questions that keep them up at night? And how, in the end, you know, all you joining, how could law students get engaged? Michelle, there's nobody better than you to tell us all this because you're teaching students in space law every day. You're one of the most renowned experts in the topic. And let me start to just, sorry if it feels very general, but I think we want to start with the basics, you know, in simple words. What is space law? What it's for? Who owns space? Which laws apply actually? Who has the right to put a flag on the moon or a village on Mars? What frames it, and what is there? What do we have? What is space law?
So Markus, such a simple question. I mean, you know, I certainly can't fill a whole hour with that. No, first of all, thank you, Markus. Thank you, Frederik, for inviting me. I'm so delighted to be here. Markus was reading out some of the places people are from, and I think it's really important. You know, space affects all of us, no matter what nation, what company is doing something, it's going to affect everybody on Earth. And so it's so important that we have as much representation and participation as possible from all over the world. So welcome to everybody. I'm based in Mississippi, where I teach, but I also spend a lot of time in New York City and a lot of time in Vienna, because Moonkind is a permanent observer to the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And so, which is, the Secretariat is the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. And you know, whatever you think of how the UN works, the UNUSA office and the UN COPUOS, I think, are some of the most successful organs of the United Nations that have been formed. But let me step back. So what is space law? But I'm going to even go back further. So what is law? Law is about relationships between people, right? And so some people think about space law and they think Russia, China, United States, Australia. That's not true. Space law is about us. It's about us people. And so it's really important that we get involved. Right now, we have 4 major treaties, international treaties that govern activities in space. So space is not this lawless frontier, wild, wild west, you know, get out there and do whatever you want. Absolutely not. We have back in during the Cold War, our forefathers, foremothers, I think they were all men at that point, got together and realized that space is something very unique, that space affects everybody. And even in the middle of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union and the United States were racing to get to the moon first, or to, you know, claim it, they decided, no, we are going to set guidelines. And the guidelines have some very basic and very important principles. So what are the guidelines? They are, space will only be used for peaceful purposes. No state may claim territory in space. So Markus, you can put your flag up there all day long, but it's just a pretty flag on the moon. It's not, this is China, this is the United States. And so I would like to congratulate China for putting up their flag as well, the latest flag to be up there. But nobody, the United States hasn't, so Russia hasn't, China has not made a claim that's saying we own the moon, or this moon is our territory. The space is to be used in collaboration, in cooperative efforts, and it's free for everybody. So the basic tenet of the Outer Space Treaty is the freedom of exploration and use of space. So what does that mean? So if we had all these freedoms on Earth, we would be bumping into each other an awful lot, right? And it would be chaotic. So there are a few sort of limits on that freedom. One is there's no militarization of space. You can't militarize celestial bodies. This is, you ask what are one of the debates in space right now is, you know, the Outer Space Treaty is very clear that you cannot put weapons of mass destruction or nuclear weapons on orbit, and you cannot militarize a celestial body. Now, what does that actually mean? This is what we're trying to figure out, and this is what you, the next generation of space lawyers, are going to help us figure out, because you, new space lawyers, and I hope all of you become space lawyers, are laying the foundation for our future, because we are not a terrestrial bound species any longer. We are a spacefaring species. So the other sort of limit on this freedom of use is something we call due regard. And fundamentally, I think everything that we talk about in space right now boils down to what do we mean by due regard? In sort of normal parlance. In conversation, we know it means being considerate of each other, but we really don't know what it means legally. And right now there's a lot of work, a lot of effort being put against this concept of what it means and how we're going to legislate, if you will, due regard.
Michelle, when you say this, it sounds like a little bit space for humankind is like a utopia where actually we would be able to live together in a way that is better than on Earth. There are so many conflicts on Earth. International law tries to frame that and draw some lines and make people behave and respect it. There are authorities actually then ruling on it and so on. There's two questions I think. One is, what makes you so optimistic that actually humankind would behave better in space than on Earth? How strong does a space law have to be, and how much better than on Earth? Or is it actually that you say what we have learned on Earth, how we have drafted our laws, how we have built our democracies, and some of the countries active in space are not democracies. We have learned so much about drawing this international system that we can translate it into space. Is there a difference? Is there a utopia, an optimism that we might start again from a blank page and make things better?
So there are some good parts of history, right? So we as you said, there have been some instances in history where good things have happened and where humanity has come together and been able to make agreements about things like the Outer Space Treaty. Do I think it's going to be a utopia? No. I mean, we are fundamentally there are good and evil in the world, and there are people who are going to be good actors and there are people who are going to be bad actors. But what I take heart in is that every astronaut who has looked back on Earth has had this overview effect, as Frank White termed it, this sense of, oh, wow, it's not just me, it's not just the United States, it's not just China. There are no boundaries. When you look back on Earth from space, you don't see boundary lines, you just see one little blue marble. And, the astronauts have come back and said things like, Edgar Mitchell used profanity to say, we need to get all the politicians up there to recognize, that we're all in this together. Other astronauts have been a lot more eloquent and elegant, but the basic concept is the farther away you get from Earth, the closer you get to each other. When it's to leave Earth and to understand, again, I do not at all advocate leaving Earth behind. Earth is our mother. Earth is our home. Earth needs to be cleaned up, and we can do that from space. We at For All Moonkind certainly really believe in peace from space. When you're in space, the conditions are very harsh. And we already have in the Outer Space Treaty, it says if you run into another astronaut, first of all, any human astronaut is an envoy of all humankind. That's the law. And so it's not an American astronaut has American interests. We have the interests of humanity, every astronaut does at heart. And this is borne out, for example, by the Apollo 11 astronauts who, when they went to the moon and they decided what to take with them, they took the medallions of the cosmonauts who passed away in the Russian effort, the Soviet effort to reach the moon. They went to the moon for those Soviet astronauts, those cosmonauts, just as much as they did for me, just as much as they did for children in Madagascar, or Mauritius, or Indonesia, or Egypt. So this is what space does, is it reminds us that we have this one little Earth that we're all sharing together. So is it going to be utopia? Are we going to get to space and everyone's going to think, oh, what were we arguing about? No, absolutely not. But what we can do is use space to make change in terms of how we interact with each other. And I open this by talking about what is law. And law is created to govern, put boundaries on relationships between people. laws created states. States didn't create laws. And so we need to move away from this concept of, oh, the state, the state, the state. We need to move away from that sovereign paradigm and start uniting as humans together. And I think that is something we can do from space.
Is the current discussion that has a lot to do with the COVID crisis, but also with a nationalization of interests in economy, where people more and more express the concept of technological sovereignty. And you can see this in the pattern that US is applying, whether it's the Trump administration or Biden administration, doesn't matter. And China is playing the same card, and now Europe also. And everybody says there are a couple of technologies which are hugely important in terms of sovereignty interests, and it's space technologies also. It's also computer chips and semiconductors and resources and all these things. Is that discussion influencing you on how you think about space law and what space law has to enable and to do? Is there a nationalization of interest on Earth that might translate into nationalization of interest in space?
I think about that a lot, and the concept of that sovereign state and this nationalization and sort of being forced to look inward because of this pandemic. And in the United States, certainly we found a lot of warts when we looked inward, right? And we're working through them. But we really want commercial space to thrive, because that is the ingenuity and the innovation of humanity. And so the more we can support commercial space and move away from achievements of sovereigns, the more we can break those bonds of sovereignty and start again. There are a lot of multilateral corporations. For example, iSpace in Japan has formed a U.S. subsidiary, and I believe it has a UK Europe subsidiary.
And Luxembourg.
Luxembourg, okay. Then this is how we break down the boundaries and those borders here on Earth, right? Now, there will always the concept of sovereignty was created by the Treaty of Westphalia, and that's what sort of formulated it, and that's what we needed to keep the peace at the time, right? We needed to figure out, humans are tribalists. That's how we survive. Whether it's your family or your community or your country, that's just a survival instinct. And so what we want to do is broaden that survival instinct to show it. No, yes, we need to be a community to survive. We need to be a human community to survive. And one thing that I always like to tell people is, you look at the space race of the 1960s and 70s, and how is it the United States, the Soviet Union put the first object into orbit. The Soviet Union put the first object onto another celestial body. The Soviet Union put the first wheels on the moon. But the United States put the first humans on the moon. And part of the reason for that is because even when we were not doing very well at diversity, we were far more diverse than the Soviet Union was. We had a lot more immigrants. We are a country of immigrants. And it's that diversity that adds to that ingenuity and that innovation. And so in order for humanity to survive, we need to capture and embrace that diversity. That's what history has shown us. We can't do it alone. It can't just be one state. It has to be a collaboration.
Yeah. And there are actually spheres where it seems to me we have learned from certain areas where law applies, international law applies on Earth, on our planet, and translated that into space law. And this is the example is, of course, if you talk about space resources and you talk about how to create a frame that enables business, it is the international sea, right? So the question was, and we did that. You did that in the US. We did that in Luxembourg. The only two countries in the world who have a space resource law like that today in place. And the basic idea was to answer the question, what can you exploit? If I use that a little bit ugly term, for some people, ugly term, but what actually can you own? What actually can you reap? Which fruits can you take? And the idea was to treat it like the international sea, where you say you can't go out there with a ship and then claim 3 square miles of international sea to be your national territory, but you can take the fish. And similar things seems to be the base now today also for claiming space resources. Is that true? Is that a translation which actually you saw happening in space law? And how far goes that?
So it goes all into interpretation, right? So we're talking about Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty, which says no state may claim territory anywhere in space by sovereignty or by any other means. And so some people read that to say that means you can't do anything without sort of further regulation. And we do have, after the Outer Space Treaty was negotiated, the international community negotiated a subsequent Moon Agreement, which talks a little bit more about how you would regulate space resource mining. So even back in the early 70s, we were thinking about mining and how we would regulate it and how we would get around this concept of no territory with respect to knowing that we were going to have to one day use these resources. So the United States and Luxembourg, as you said we interpret Article 2 to say that we can't claim territory, but we can claim the resources. So long as we're not claiming a territory for ourselves, we can take the resources, we can use them, we can sell them, we can own the resources. If you mine it, you own it. And the interpretation is still a debate. There are so many people who will argue that that is an incorrect interpretation of the Outer Space Treaty. So this is something we're talking about now. And again, this is one of the things that all you young space lawyers are going to be wrestling with as well, because we're not going to solve this within the next 3-4 years. This is something we're going to talk about, and which is good, because what we don't want is, oh, here's the solution, we're going to put these laws in place, because we don't even know what it looks like yet to mine on the moon. So what we want is an adaptive and a flexible administration of these activities. And so the Artemis Accords sort of push that concept one step further and say, now we've said world, the United States interprets Article 2 to mean we can extract resources. Now world, this is our concept of how we might do that within the framework of the Outer Space Treaty. And so the Artemis Accords they're called safety zones or exclusion zones. And that would just mean that is how we would exercise due regard. We would say, okay, I'm here now. Please let me know if you want to come over near me, and we'll talk about the safest way to do that. And so that would be the concept of how you would interpret due regard to allow you to extract resources without impinging on other people's freedom of use.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I think your perspective on law is something which is very important for a general understanding and actually a lobbying for law in a very, very broad sense, because many people seem to think that law is something that actually just prohibits and limits. And what we see in this whole space resource debate and how we try to frame it is that actually law is something that enables. You can only have freedom freedom is not Wild West. Freedom is something which is given in a frame that, societies engage on and agree on. So we do need space law in order to have the freedom to do commerce in space, in order to have the freedom to populate space, to have tourism in space, whatever, all these things, you know, which assurance applies if you make a space trip as a tourist, you know, which country law applies if you don't behave well on the spaceship and aggress others, and so on and so on. There's a lot of things. But basically, I think what we are learning again is that law enables and is not made for prohibiting first. But at the same time, my question is, are you not seeing space law being developed very much in the Western world, let's put it like this, while people in Russia or China might think, well, let's not get too much engaged because it only limits our activities and we can do it under the radar screen. And in other words, my question maybe is, are there Chinese space lawyers as well? Are there Russian space lawyers as well? Are you, do you know them? Are you working together? Is this really a joint?
Well, so I don't represent the United States, but I represent Moonkind, and our legal advisory council includes lawyers from China and from Russia and from UAE, from all over the world. And so I started, when I opened, I talked about the United Nations and the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. You know, the actual law will be formed through these multilateral treaties, which in the past have been negotiated through the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space with respect to space. This past year has been a very interesting one. Obviously, we have not been able to go to Vienna and be face to face, but there's no intent of it. I don't believe there's any intent of any one nation to sort of move forward without anybody else involved. And you know, we have this interesting dichotomy right now where we have the Artemis Accords, the United States created or developed with the help of 8 other countries. You know, sort of this understanding of what it would be like to utilize resources on the lunar surface. I believe there's 9 countries who have agreed to those principles and guidelines. And then Russia and China just entered into an MOU to create a lunar base of some sort. So you know, a lot of people are concerned that we have parallel efforts and that's sort of going to pull away the multilateralism that we need for space. I disagree completely. You need to put a stake in the sand and in order to start moving the conversation forward. You need the COCOIS just as much as you need states to start taking the lead in certain things. And I'm not saying the United States got it right or China and Russia got it right. I'm saying they have put their interpretation out for the world to see, and now it's time for the world to argue against it or negotiate against it, or say, no, that's wrong. That's the incorrect interpretation. And unfortunately, at this time, it has to go through governments, but commercial entities also have a very big say in this. And one thing we haven't talked about yet is this concept of customary international law. And you know, when I'm sure there's going to be a question about how do you enforce law on the moon or on Mars, because there's no police there. And you know, Space Force the U.S. Space Force is a bunch of people on computers here, and not you know, Starfleet Command or something. And so again, it boils down to the relationships between humans. And building, you know, one of the things that we're focused on here at the University of Mississippi is building that framework, that foundational line, that what we need to have in place now to assure that we really do observe and respect human rights in space. And that's really important, because what we don't want are company towns or British East India colonialism kind of things happening. And so this, even as you see individual nations sort of taking steps, we're all going to end up at the same place. And I think the more we have out loud in the open, whether it's the MOU or the Artemis Accords, then the more we have people like us, people like students, people like you all talking about it and thinking about it and thinking of better ways to do it. And so that's, you know, to all this budding space lawyers, all of you on this call, that's the point, is, you know, you are the innovators and you're the ingenious ones. We're the old people who have been living this for 40 years. right? We need your thoughts and we need them now. You know, this is a very young field in law, and there's not a lot of law out there. And so we need to make it as we move along, and we need to make it properly and flexibly, and we need to bring all of the sensibilities of as broad a swath of people and nations as we can.
Yeah. Now, we spoke a lot about nations, but we also spoke about commerce already. And of course, there's a big movement now, which for some people looks like a Wild West movement, which is a gold rush, where some very wealthy private billionaires are just going out there, like Elon Musk, and he's very much admired for it. But you can also turn around and say, what happens actually if Elon builds a village on Mars and there is 50 people living there, 100 people living there, 500,000, 50,000, whatever, and it is the law that applies in that village the laws that apply on the corridors of SpaceX in Hawthorne, California, or what is it? You know, which constitution actually? Who governs that? Is that a question for space law as well? Does that keep you up at night?
Absolutely. It doesn't keep me up at night because I just think it's so exciting. It keeps me dreaming at night. Okay. So I actually, I'm president of the National Space Society, and I just wrote a column on this for Astro magazine. National Space Society is a US-based organization, but I encourage everybody to join because I'm going to be doing a lot of very exciting things with young people and creating a president's council and so forth. But first of all, the billionaires, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, I am thankful to them every day. Because why? Because they are bringing the cost. They are investing their own money to bring the cost of spaceflight down. And so I'm not probably, unfortunately, never going to be able to afford to go to space because I don't see myself spending $300,000 when there's so many other things I could use the money on. But I think that my children will be able to afford to go to space because the cost will have come down. So I applaud them and I'm thankful for them. They're doing things that taxpayers don't want to spend money on right now, unfortunately. So we need them. Elon Musk goes and builds a village on Mars. So how does that work under the law? Elon Musk is an American citizen. He's going to probably launch from the United States. So US laws apply to him. So he's on Mars with his new, Musk empire, and he makes his own laws and rules. Well, when is he going to be able to start actually sever the ties with Earth? Not for a while. He's going to need resupply. He's going to be tethered to Earth. Whatever community he has is going to be tethered to Earth for a long time because I believe in a lot of human ingenuity, but I don't believe that a Mars community is going to be able to sustain itself, with food and whatever else they need in the first 3 years of its existence. So they will be tethered to Earth. They will need to communicate to Earth. And that is, we will have sort of the long arm jurisdiction to, control's the wrong word, but to sort of keep an eye on what they're doing. And I have argued that we need to create for every human space traveler, every company, every individual ought to have an assurance from whichever service provider they're using that they will have a right to oxygen, that they will have a right to communication whenever they want, because the biggest thing about enforcement is going to be understanding what's going on. We don't want one mouthpiece talking for an entire community. So then there is that tether. But of course, this isn't the International Space Station. It's not 6 hours from Earth. So you can't say this is how we're going to govern it because it's too far away. So you have to have faith in humanity and you have to let these intrepid explorers start making their own rules. And we have to be prepared to let go. This should not be the United States of Mars. This should be Mars, another country, another nation that is born and is permitted to join the United Nations. This is what we want to grow to. We don't want to grow to colonialism or to company towns. We want to give these explorers the opportunity to create their own worlds, hopefully in the visions of our shiniest democracies. Yes, I am a true believer in democracy. And so I understand that other spacefaring nations aren't, but I hope that it's democracy that we are able to take to space with us.
Last question, maybe before we open it for the questions from the audience here and from everybody attending. It sounds nice when you say, Outer Space Treaty 1967, right? A long time ago. We exclude any military activity, or what exactly is the term? There's a lot of discussion about what is military, and is it activity, is it conflict, is it whatever, is it arming celestial bodies or whatever. But for me, there's two questions. Does space law not have to deal with this question anyway? Because military use of our environment, of our technologies and so on is very much, for me at least, as somebody living in democracy, and I elected to government and I trust in the institutions, there's a legitimate interest and justification to frame the security of your population. This is totally legitimate. Why does space law, and why is the whole discussion, just turning the blind eye on this military question? We do need defense strategies. We do need security. Military is not only for making war, but for keeping peace.
That's a very wonderful perspective, and this is something. So the concept of space, the guiding principle, is that it will be used for peaceful purposes, and that is, the way we're debating what does it mean to claim a territory. What does Article 2 mean with regard to appropriation and mining? There's a lot of discussion of what does peaceful purposes mean. The fact of the matter is, space is already used for military purposes. If space was used for military, the very first use of space was a military purpose, right? We sent satellites up to spy on each other. So the military use of space is a given. The question is how much more do we want? And so when we're thinking about the peaceful use of space and militarization of space, it's more of think more about nuclear test ban treaties. What can we do to prevent a war in space or a war from space? Because there are a lot of very frightening weapons that could be deployed from space that would destroy a nation or the entire Earth. And so the framing of the military uses of space is, I believe, should be, and again, this is where citizens and space lawyers get involved and need to comment and talk about, is preventing, war in or war from space. So one thing to use space to defend yourself through a notification. Don't be sending lasers down to, take out the Empire State Building. But in terms of being able to identify and support your ground troops, I think is a given.
Yeah, it's not a taboo, you say. Yeah. Hey, Michel, thanks. That's a very good tour d'horizon, as we say in French already. But Frederik, I would like to pass on to you and now just get some questions from the audience and have Michel answer them as good as she can, and I'm sure she can.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to both of you for this amazing introduction. I am really sad that my university doesn't offer any space law courses now because I'm really interested in it. But let's have a look at the chat. We got some questions from AJ Link. I think he refers to the first topic you kind of conquered, like that in space there should be like a humankind or maybe a moonkind. So he's asked, how do we convince state governments that more cooperation will help everyone rather than independent states competing in another space race?
So hi, AJ. He's one of my students, and he's brilliant. He could probably answer this himself, and so I'm going to be careful. But it's a great question, and it's something that young space lawyers really need to think about. I believe that we can build the collaboration that we need from the bottom up through individuals, through organizations like For All Moonkind, like the National Space Society, and through commercial companies like iSpace, which has already broken down those borders and barriers. And so it's going to be a long time. I mean, we're seeing sort of this geopolitics play in on Earth, affecting stuff in space. So it's up to us to make that collaboration work. It's up to you guys to make that collaboration work. And it's a constant, I send a delegation and I go myself to the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space 3 times each year. And I bring as large a delegation as they will allow, because it's all about talking to people regardless of where they're from. And that's something I learned. My parents were diplomats, and my parents, a lot of families used to sort of hide behind the walls of the American embassy. My parents went out whenever they could, and they reached out to the native population, to the country, and talked. My father brought lettuce seeds to China for the first time ever, because my mother wanted lettuce, and my father's like, well, let's go find a farmer who will plant the lettuce for us. We're all people, we're all in this together. Sure, our governments have to postulate and so forth, but we can change that. And I've proven it through For All Moonkind. Because of the For All Moonkind, we have the One Small Step Act in the United States. Because of For All Moonkind, we have Section 9 of the Artemis Accords, which talks about heritage for the first time ever. So that's in 3 years, we were able to do that. Imagine what you guys can do.
Well, that sounds amazing. I'm really looking forward to our future in that. Then there's another question. You mentioned safety zones, but do you think that maybe there is a possibility that these safety zones can turn into exclusionary zones?
Yes, absolutely. That is the biggest sort of debate about these safety zones, and they are called safety zones or exclusion zones, or what the bottom line is. And the one thing we can't get away from is that if you are creating a zone around yourself, you are excluding other people. Even if you're not saying I'm excluding you, I just want you to tell me before you come close to me. But the thing is, the benefits are for humankind to create some sort of zone. And we need to figure out, should the zone, should there be a time limit on the zones? Should they only be for 30 years? Who's going to sort of keep notifications of the zones? But fundamentally, if you want to explore the moon, or if you want to do science on the moon, or if you want to mine on the moon, or any other celestial body, I use the moon because it's the one that's closest, right? You don't want your work interrupted. And you, Markus, you talked about sort of how the laws can help. The investors want to know, what are the boundaries of what my investment can do? I don't want people paying lawyers to argue about what a safety zone is and what is due regard. I want that money to go into actual mining and science and exploration. And so, yes, there is a very huge danger with respect to the concept of safety zone. And it's one we really have to get on top of right now. At For All Moonkind, we believe that if we can understand a safety zone with respect to something we all want to protect, like the first landing sites on the moon, then we can get a better understanding of how these safety zones will work. And I just, one more thing, the material on the moon, the regolith, is very gritty and very damaging. And so one of the reasons you need this concept of a safety zone also is that if you get too close, you're going to damage somebody else's equipment. So it's a very pragmatic concept that we really have to get our heads around.
Thank you for that. There's also a question, as you said, we have these international treaties, but as the law on space is very much one of international treaties, will the future of space law and on its ground enforcement demand for stronger UN institutions?
I think that that's a tough one. The UN does a lot of things very well, and it does a lot of things very poorly. And I think, unfortunately, there is a lack of trust with some people with respect to the UN, with some companies, with some states, right? I would like to see some sort of regulatory body grow from the bottom up. Again, I put emphasis on these commercial entities. You know, I want to, and again, when you think about space law, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, space lawyers would go into the government and work on negotiations and spend a lot of time in Vienna negotiating. Today, space lawyers can go to companies like SpaceX and Boeing and Airbus and actually help move the company into space. So it's that citizen spacefarer that needs to collaborate. And so I think, you know, the more we can get commercial entities working with each other, then the more we can bring the states along with us. And I think that's the way we need to think about it. And we need to sort of banish, you know, we talked about the Convention of the Law of the Sea, that there are a lot of models, the Antarctic Convention, that offer some ideas, but space is different from everything else we've ever encountered on Earth. And so we have to think differently about it and be open to different types of organizations and institutions.
Well, yeah, maybe some of us, who knows, will build this institution, but what can we do now to get into space law as students and get the right education, the right knowledge to maybe build this institution? So
one thing to remember is space is about people, and space is for everybody. Very soon, every terrestrial law that we practice, we're going to need to do in space, or will be affected by space, or will affect space. So think about the Axiom space in the US is going to build a hotel, right? We are going to need labor laws for space. So one thing you can do is, you know, the space law community is very small. I would say, again, join the National Space Society. I'm going to have a president's council where we will talk monthly about space law, and you can sort of keep in the community that way. Follow space lawyers, contact space lawyers on LinkedIn, and follow them, and you will be constantly. We post everything we can think of and that we see. You can, once you complete your law degree, you can come to Mississippi and get your Master of Laws. We have the best program in the world, we have 6 separate space law courses. We have externships, we have internships. It's a wonderful community, wonderful opportunity. But, you know, honestly, the best thing you can do you know, I know that sort of thinking about going back to school again is not, but build a space community yourself. Look at what you've done here, Frederik. You've brought 110 people that I can see together online to talk about space, and that's exactly the kind of movement that we need. And you know, the more you do things like this, the more likely your university will realize, oh, we should probably teach space law. And that's one of the things, and one of the reasons I enjoy these conversations so much is because I honestly believe that space law ought to be taught as in the US we do space law after the law degree after the undergraduate degree, but space law ought to be taught right there with constitutional law, because it's so important, because everything we do on Earth is affected by space, everything. And if we don't understand that, if we as lawyers don't understand that, then we're going to be malpracticing.
Well, also maybe for those who don't know, you should become SpaceWatchers and subscribe to the newsletter and get all the information on space right ahead. Whole nother topic, and I'm really glad this question came up because I'm personally interested in this. Space debris or space junk is a real issue in the way of space travel. How can space law push us humans to work on this issue and pave the way for future generations of space travelers, since it's a lot of money that we have to invest in it, but it's a huge problem. Maybe, first of all, you could explain the problem to the audience and then give us a solution.
Of course, I have the solution. So the concept of space debris is a very big issue. So you think about Earth's orbit as its own sort of little environment. We've sent, I think, 8,000. We've launched 8,000 separate objects into space at the last count. Of those objects, only about not quite 3,000 are still operative. So that's 5,000 pieces of junk up there, big pieces of junk that have nothing to do and are just sort of trash. Compounding that are when these break up, they create smaller pieces, which also circle the Earth. And so we have had multiple anti-satellite tests, which have deliberately broken up satellites and created debris fields. And so that's lots of little pieces of debris. Now, what does that mean? So don't forget that these little pieces of debris are traveling at 70,000 miles per hour. I don't remember if it's kilometers or miles, but they're traveling really, really fast. And so when shuttle was active, it would come back with chips in its windshield, which the scientists discovered were from paint flecks. So a paint fleck in space can dent the windshield of shuttle. So imagine what something this, I in my class, I show a marble 10 centimeters can create a divot. And then I switch to inches, about 7 inches in a piece of metal. So this is very dangerous. And a researcher named Kessler said, the problem is the debris, the chance of the debris hitting something and breaking increases exponentially. So the more debris we have, the more likely it's going to hit something, which will more likely create more debris. And at the rate we're going, NASA has done some research and said, if we don't start cleaning up, then we are going to not have the opportunity to launch into orbit at all. We're just going to cloud our orbit so badly that we can't get off our planet. And how tragic would that be? So the international community has come together. They recognize this and they created orbital debris mitigation guidelines. And so those are things that say, okay, if you're going to launch, these are the things you have to do to make sure that your satellite doesn't cause more debris. And they have an end of life rule. Within 25 years after the end of life of your satellite, you have to show that it's going to be no longer debris. It's going to either be pushed way out beyond Earth or into Earth's atmosphere and break up. So 25 years, it's a long time for an inoperable object there. So now there's been this discussion, and I've talked a lot about Astroscale. It's a company that is involved in active debris removal. We need to start funding companies that will go up and move these objects out of the way so that they don't break up. We need to, there's companies that are looking at creating nets to grab those smaller pieces of debris and putting them down into orbit. So those are great and innovative ideas. The problem is, who's going to pay? There's no law that says you have to clean up after yourself in space. That's a problem. There is no law that says you have to clean up. Think about the environment on Earth and all of the environmental laws we have about Superfund cleanups and climate change and so forth. We need to start thinking about that for space. And unfortunately, our generation, my generation, hasn't done a good job of that. And so it is up to your generation to, again, what the biggest thing is the money. So taxpayers have to go to their governments and say, we need our taxes to pay for debris remediation. Because this is important, because I want my children to be able to reach the moon. I don't want my children stuck here on Earth because we can't clean up. This is something we need to invest in now. So from a space law perspective, I've been working on, the National Space Society is working on a program with Astroscale to try and get the UK and ELSA both have programs to have debris remediation, that debris removal proof of concept. We think the United States should as well. And we're also looking at building the argument that due regard means clean up after yourself. I mean, how can it not, right? And so, my research is sort of pushing this concept of, as we continue to think about it, due regard has got to mean that you can't leave your stuff up there to hit somebody else. And certainly you should be liable if it hits somebody else.
Thanks, Michelle. I think, Frederik and everybody here on the call, what we realize is there's a lot to do. There's enormous space for space law and necessity and need. It's a fascinating topic. It's somehow also for all those who are inspired and inclined to really write history and write on a blank page. Here you can, and invent yourself and invent space from a law perspective. I think we could go on for hours, and we should certainly consider this just a start and a kickoff. And the first Young Global Talent Space Café was meant to be that, and just open the horizon and show us a little bit this big picture. And Michelle, thank you very much for joining for this one. I know you were passionate about it from the very beginning when we asked you, and we can see that you are passionate about it when you talk about it. And I can only recommend everybody look for Michelle Hanlon on Twitter or LinkedIn. I can hardly follow everything you're writing, because you're very active, and there are enormously interesting debates that you are driving, that you're following. And so for anybody here on the call who is interested in it, you can hook up. I'd like to say thank you for the time being. We have 56 minutes into our Space Café, and should leave it there. But please don't hesitate to get back to us, everybody here on the call. If you have any other ideas, if you have questions, if you want to get in touch, if you want to be part of the community, you can use this platform or others. And we stay in touch, and we will keep on discussing. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Let me just, to finish this, point you to a couple of next events that might be of interest for you as well, which are on the SpaceWatch platform. We have next Space Café. This is a 33 minutes format that Thorsten is hosting every Tuesday. With Arti Holler-Meini. She is from the European Satellite Operator Association, ESOA. Then comes a discussion on 6th of April with Alexandre Vallée, who is head of space science at the IDU. The IDU is the International Telecommunications Union, the governing body on behalf of the United Nations that actually deals with all frequencies, all spectrum rights, all things in Geneva, ITU. Very relevant discussion. Then comes Moriba Vox Populi. Moriba Jah is a professor at the University of Austin, Texas, a colleague of yours, Michelle, more dealing on the space traffic, space debris side. A lot talking about space environment questions and so on. That's hugely interesting too. And then comes Robert Feuerbach, who is a rocket specialist and also a consultant with his own firm, talking about launch vehicles and newest trends and so on. And you can also find the last Space Café that we held with Darren McKnight. That's online on SpaceWatch.com. So this is our little program. Keep on working. We thank you for supporting this and joining. When you join, you support us, and please, let's keep going. And I thank ELSA and the European Law Student Association very much for this idea and this engagement. And let's keep going.
Well, thank you, Markus, very much for the invitation and giving us the opportunity to bring these topics to so many law students. Also, I want to mention that we are not the only ELSA group that focuses on space law. So ELSA Warsaw in Poland will host the International Conference in Space and Telecommunications Law tomorrow and the day after. So if you are now really interested with what I'm sure about, then you don't hesitate to register now. There will be lots of webinars and panel discussions about everything we just briefly mentioned.
Okay.
And once again, thank you, Mrs. Hanlon, Professor Hanlon, for giving us the opportunity to speak to you.
Well, thank you both. And that as we're thanking, I just want to say, SpaceWatch.Global, as Frederik pointed out, is an incredible resource. And if you are not getting their newsletter in your mailbox, then you're missing out on a lot. So I want to thank SpaceWatch.Global for the incredible support they've given me over the years and for all Moonkind as well. So thank you. And thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. And thanks, Thorsten, who is running the show behind the scene and who is the master of all this. Mastermind. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.